After the loss of my father, I set out to cure cancer at 12. I wanted to have impact, and I thought that would be an amazing way to have impact. So I applied myself and took the requisite classes as a pre-med. I only took one elective, and that was a field course in biodiversity, and I was changed. I saw the world differently. I feel like my eyes were open for the first time. I saw the entanglements of life, colorful and chaotic, yet harmonious. It's at that point that I understood what it meant to have passion and purpose for your work, and it's at that moment that I dedicated myself to the study and the conservation of biodiversity. It wasn't until a couple years later, working deep in the Amazon on a floating raft, that I realized how complex this work would be. For within a year of living on that raft, the forest went from full and lush to 70% deforested. It was just gone. And it was as a result of national policies in response to international pressure to save the rainforest. It was unbelievable, complex indeed. But before that deforestation started, deep in the Amazon, in the rainforest, I felt serenity and power. And it wasn't until a few years later that I realized there's extensive research behind that feeling when we are in nature. For biodiversity is many things, and it's measured in very different ways. Biodiversity is the genetic diversity that powers evolution. It is 8 million species that share the planet with us. It's the way those species come together in places to form habitats and ecosystems. And it's the functions that they all deliver when they interact together. We experience those functions as ecosystem services. Those services include clean air, clean water, a stable climate, and the nutrient-rich soil to grow our food. These services are a combination, come together in complex interactions of all the elements of biodiversity. I want to give you an example of this to just bring it home so you can understand how complex these interactions are that deliver these services. In the Atlantic rainforest on the coast of Brazil, when you remove large fruit-eating animals from the forest by poaching, their role in distributing and dispersing the large seeds for the large carbon-dense trees is gone. And what you end up with then is a forest that is dominated by smaller softwood trees. In the end, you have a degraded forest that stores less carbon, delivers less water, cleans less air, and accelerates climate change, all from pulling out the fruit-eating animals. It's really amazing. These cascading dynamics are happening around the globe in a mounting crisis, decades in the making, at the scale and magnitude of climate change. And it doesn't matter how you measure biodiversity or which part of biodiversity you decide to measure, it's all declining. The Living Planet Index has shown a 73% decline in monitored wildlife populations around the globe in just 50 years. That is extraordinary. And we know what the causes are. We know which sectors of our economy have the biggest damage. And it's from habitat destruction, overharvest, pollution, invasive species, and of course, climate change. And when these ubiquitous declines in biodiversity are combined with climate change, we can experience negative tipping points. A negative tipping point is just a threshold that's reached when cumulative impacts create a change that becomes self-sustaining and irreversible and goes into a new stable state. The 2025 Global Tipping Points report suggests that coral reefs have already reached a tipping point after decades of dieback, and that the Amazon rainforest, without intervention, will also reach a tipping point in which the rainforest goes from rainforest to grassland and savanna. The result would be an enormous store of carbon released to the atmosphere, accelerating climate change, changing weather patterns, food production patterns, and of course, resulting in an unimaginable loss of biodiversity and livelihoods. And it's not that these negative tipping points have ripples through society. They create tsunamis of impact because 55% of the global economy is dependent on nature. So what's the way forward? Well, a lot of us have been thinking about that for quite some time. And we think we can use the concept of tipping points in our favor by developing positive tipping points. We're all witnessing a positive tipping point right now in the decarbonization of our energy system. Even though it isn't going as fast as we would like, it is happening, and change is happening worldwide with very, very good progress in Asia and in the global south as renewables become cheaper and more available. And it didn't happen spontaneously. It's a result of negotiations and planning and implementation and everywhere around the globe in a distributed manner. It happens because people wanted it to happen, and they're making it happen in every community around the globe. I think we can do that for biodiversity as well with the right kind of focus. What we need to do and think about is mitigating drivers that propel negative tipping points. We need to be accelerating the positive synergistic strategies across sectors to amplify and accelerate transitions. We need to be communicating constantly about the positive impacts, even when and especially when there's friction, and we need to constantly be adapting. There's three systems that really need our attention. First is the energy system, and the transition is already in motion. Two things we need to watch is that the deployment of renewable energies and the sourcing of the critical minerals to fuel that transition doesn't have negative impacts on biodiversity and on people. The second is the food system. The food system, incredibly, is the source of a third of all greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of all freshwater use, and the largest driver of habitat change. There's three elements of the food system transition. It's shifting diets, it's reducing food loss and waste, and making harvest and production of our food nature positive. And finally, finance. You would be surprised to know that $7 trillion is invested every year that goes into undermining nature. That's $7 trillion invested every year that undermines the $58 trillion of our economy, our global economy that's dependent on nature. That is not rational. The finance sector needs attention. It needs metrics so that they can make rational decisions so that we can have a whole earth. And in the end, we can create cascading tipping points for biodiversity by good planning, by targeted policies, and making sure that we are working together, changing our work and our life, and doing everything big and small in every community around the globe, because biodiversity needs a positive tipping point. Because biodiversity isn't just that feeling I felt in the Amazon. It is the fabric of life that sustains us all.